never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd leave her fortune to a stranger. 87 years I spent building a life, raising children, believing that blood was thicker than water. But sometimes, strangers become family, and family becomes, well, that's a story I need to tell you from the beginning. They say you can't buy love, but you can definitely put a price on abandonment. My children learned that lesson the hard way when they read about me in the Cedar Falls Tribune, not from a birth announcement or a graduation ceremony, but from a story about an old woman who chose kindness over kinship. A story that started with a store-bought birthday cake and ended with a house deed in someone else's name. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and this is how I discovered that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who owe you nothing at all. My 87th birthday started with the scent of vanilla candles I'd lit myself. I remember standing by my kitchen window, watching the morning light dance across the old oak tree where my children once built their tree fort. The same tree where I'd hung their Halloween costumes to dry, where I'd photographed them on their first day of school, year after year. I was brewing my morning tea, Earl Grey, the way Harold used to make it, when I heard the familiar sound of Rebecca's SUV pulling into my driveway. "Happy birthday, Mom!" Rebecca called out, her voice carrying that artificial brightness I'd learned to dread. Thomas was right behind her, adjusting his tie the way he always did when he was nervous about something. They were both carrying grocery bags and wearing smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Something cold settled in my stomach as I watched them approach. The same feeling I'd had the day Harold's doctor had asked us to sit down. They'd brought balloons from the dollar store and a sheet cake with "Happy Birthday" written in blue frosting. Not the lemon cake with cream cheese frosting I'd made for every one of their birthdays, decorated with the little sugar flowers I'd learned to craft from watching YouTube videos. This was different, efficient, distant, like they were fulfilling an obligation rather than celebrating a life. We sat around my dining room table, the same scarred oak surface where I'd helped them with algebra homework, where we'd played countless games of Monopoly on rainy Sunday afternoons. "Mom, we've been talking," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm in the way he used when he had to fire someone at his accounting firm. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. When was the last time my son had voluntarily touched me? The warmth should have been comforting, but it felt like a prelude to something terrible. That's when they told me about Sunset Manor. They made it sound like a resort, like they were giving me a gift I'd been secretly hoping for. A place where I'd have peers and activities and wouldn't have to worry about the burden of maintaining my home. But what they were really telling me was that I'd become inconvenient, that my independence was now their liability, and that the house where I'd loved and laughed and grieved for 62 years was about to become someone else's problem. The smell of industrial-strength pine cleaner hit me the moment we walked through the automatic doors of Sunset Manor. I clutched my purse tighter, the one Harold had given me for our 40th anniversary, and tried not to notice how my children's steps had become brisk and purposeful. This wasn't a tour. This was a delivery. "You'll love the activities here, Mom," Rebecca kept saying as we walked past residents sitting in wheelchairs, staring at a television that was playing some game show too loudly. The woman at the front desk had kind eyes but tired hands, and I could see her taking inventory of me the way nurses do, noting my steady gait, my clear speech, my ability to follow simple directions. I was still functional, still manageable, still worth the monthly fee my children had apparently already agreed to pay. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until weeks later, was that even as I was being shown my new room with its narrow bed and shared bathroom, a real estate agent was already measuring my kitchen for new countertops. What I didn't know was that my children had been planning this for months, that they'd already sorted through my belongings like items at an estate sale, keeping what had value and donating what didn't. The director, a woman named Mrs. Patterson with silver hair and a rehearsed smile, showed me around like she was presenting a hotel suite. "This is where you'll take your meals," she said, gesturing to a dining room that smelled like cafeteria food and disinfectant. "And this is our activity room, where we have bingo twice a week and movie nights on Fridays. She didn't mention the defeated look in the eyes of the people sitting around the puzzle table, or the way some of them called out for children who never came. That first night, lying in a bed that smelled like someone else's dreams, listening to Mrs. Kowalski down the hall, calling for her daughter, who'd been dead for 3 years, I understood the truth. This wasn't about my safety or my well-being. This was about my children's convenience, their peace of mind, their ability to check Mom's taken care of off their endless to-do lists. And somewhere in my chest, beneath the grief and the shock and the bewilderment, a small flame of something I'd never felt before began to burn. The phone on my nightstand became my tormentor. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of breakfast trays rattling down the hallway and reach for that beige plastic receiver, hoping against hope that it would ring. Instead, I'd hear the dial tone humming like a flat line, reminding me that no one was thinking about me. No one was wondering how I'd slept. No one cared if I was adjusting to this new life they'd chosen for me. Mother's Day arrived like a slap in the face. I watched from my window as cars pulled into the parking lot, disgorging families with flowers and homemade cards and grandchildren who squealed with delight at seeing their loved ones. Mrs. Rodriguez's son brought her a potted orchid and spent the afternoon reading to her in Spanish. Mr. Chen's daughter wheeled him outside to the garden, where they sat in comfortable silence, watching the birds at the feeder. I pretended to be absorbed in the crossword puzzle book Rebecca had left me, but really I was counting the minutes until visiting hours ended, and I could stop pretending I wasn't waiting for someone who would never come. The activities coordinator, a cheerful young woman named Jamie with bright pink scrubs and an endless supply of enthusiasm, kept trying to include me in everything. Mrs. Whitmore, we're starting a book club. Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to help us with the community garden? I participated because the alternative was sitting alone in my room, staring at the 3 photographs they'd let me bring. My wedding picture, Rebecca's college graduation, Thomas holding his first baby. But my heart wasn't in it. My heart was still in that house on Maple Street, waiting for children who had already erased me from their daily lives. 4 months passed before I stopped asking the front desk if I had any messages. 4 months before I stopped combing my hair with extra care on weekends, just in case they decided to surprise me with a visit. 4 months before I accepted that I had become a problem they'd solved, a chapter in their lives they'd quietly closed. The realization came slowly, like the way darkness falls. So gradually you don't notice until you're completely surrounded by it. But something else was happening too. As the hope for my old life faded, space opened up for something new. The flame in my chest grew warmer, brighter, as I began to understand that if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop waiting for love to find me and start recognizing it when it appeared in unexpected forms. I had to learn to see kindness not as a consolation prize, but as a gift worth treasuring. Gabriel Martinez appeared on a Thursday morning like an answer to prayers I hadn't even realized I was praying. He was part of a volunteer group from St. Mary's Catholic Church, bringing books and conversation to residents who'd been forgotten by the outside world. Medium height with gentle brown eyes and hands that spoke of honest work, he reminded me of my brother Eddie. The way he listened without judgment, the way he made you feel like your words had weight in a world that seemed determined to make you invisible. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside my bed. I heard you used to be a librarian. I'd love to hear about that. No one had asked me about my past in months. No one had cared about who I used to be before I became just another elderly woman, taking up space in a nursing home. But Gabriel did. He sat there for 3 hours while I told him about my 40-year career at the Cedar Falls Public Library, about the children I'd helped discover their first favorite books, about the literacy programs I'd started, about the difference I'd tried to make in my small corner of the world. He returned the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. Slowly, our conversations deepened beyond pleasantries and into the territory of real friendship. He told me about his wife, Carmen, who ran a small bakery that made the most incredible tres leches cake, and about his son, Miguel, who was in his final year of medical school at the University of Iowa. I told him about my garden, about the prize-winning roses I'd cultivated for decades, about the grandchildren I'd barely gotten to know, because distance and busy schedules had kept us apart. You know, he said one afternoon, his voice soft with emotion. Carmen and we never got to know our grandmothers. They died when we were children, back in Mexico. But talking with you, it's like having the grandmother we always dreamed of having. His words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they healed something in me I hadn't even known was broken. For the first time in months, someone saw me not as a burden or a problem to be managed, but as a person worth knowing, worth loving, worth missing. Thursday mornings became my lifeline in a week full of sameness. Gabriel brought me books from the library's used book sale, sometimes flowers from Carmen's garden, always stories about the world beyond these walls. But more than that, he brought me back to myself, the woman I'd been before I became invisible, before I became someone else's inconvenience, before I forgot that I still had value beyond the memories I carried. 8 months into our friendship, Gabriel arrived looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His usual smile was nowhere to be found, and his hands trembled as he set down the small bouquet of marigolds he'd brought from Carmen's garden. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with the kind of fear that every parent dreads, "I need to tell you something about Miguel. He's been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The treatment, it's going to cost $47,893. Our insurance will cover some of it, but not nearly enough." I watched this man who had become my lifeline struggle with the weight of his son's diagnosis. Miguel was 26, the same age Thomas had been when he'd married his first wife. I remembered the terror I'd felt when Rebecca had been hospitalized with pneumonia. At age 12, that overwhelming panic that makes a parent willing to trade their own life for their child's health. Gabriel was drowning in that same fear, that same desperate need to fix what seemed unfixable. "How much do you need?" I asked quietly. Gabriel looked startled by the directness of my question. "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm not telling you this to ask for anything. I needed to tell someone who would understand what it feels like to love someone so much that their pain becomes your pain." But I did understand, perhaps better than he knew. I understood what it meant to love someone so completely that you'd give anything, sacrifice anything, to save them from suffering. That night I lay in my narrow bed thinking about the strong box I'd hidden beneath the floorboards of my basement 43 years ago, hidden so well that my children had never found it when they'd cleaned out my house, even though they'd been thorough in their search for anything of value. Inside that box were the silver dollars Harold had collected, the jewelry my grandmother had left me, the savings bonds I'd purchased religiously every month since I'd started working at the library, my security, my insurance policy, my way of making sure I'd never be a burden to anyone. The next morning I called the one person I knew I could trust completely. "Gabriel," I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to promise me you'll do it exactly as I tell you. No questions asked until after it's done." There was a pause, and then his voice, warm with the love I'd come to depend on. "Of course, Mrs. Eleanor. Whatever you need." I gave Gabriel an address and a key, a small silver key I'd kept hidden in my jewelry box for over 4 decades. 3247 Maple Street, I told him, watching his eyes widen as he realized I was talking about my old house. "In the basement, behind the water heater, there's a loose stone in the foundation. The box is there, wrapped in oilcloth." His face went pale as I explained what he would find, but I held up my hand to stop his protests before they could begin. "This is not charity, mijo," I said, using the Spanish endearment Carmen had taught me during one of their visits. "This is family taking care of family. You and Carmen have been more family to me in these months than my own blood has been in years. This is what real families do. We sacrifice for each other. We choose each other's happiness over our own comfort." The tears streaming down his face matched the ones I could no longer hold back. 5 days later, Gabriel sat in my room with his head in his hands, overwhelmed by what he'd discovered. He'd found the box exactly where I'd described, hidden behind decades of dust and spiderwebs. Inside were 62 silver dollars, my grandmother's emerald ring, my mother's pearl bracelet, and bonds worth $34,712, more than enough to pay for Miguel's treatment, with money left over to help other families facing similar crises. "Mrs. Eleanor," he whispered, "I can't accept this. It's your life savings, your security. What if you need it?" But I'd already made my peace with my decision. What good was security if you had no one to share it with? What good was wealth if it couldn't be used to save someone you loved? My children had taken my house, my independence, my dignity, but they couldn't take my right to choose who deserved my love, my trust, my final gift. "You've given me something more valuable than money," I told him, taking his weathered hands in mine. "You've given me purpose again. You've shown me that love doesn't end when people disappoint you. It just finds new places to grow. This is my gift to you. To Miguel, to the future I won't live to see but can still help create." For the first time since I'd been brought to this place, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. 3 weeks after Miguel's successful first round of treatment, Gabrielle and Carmen came to visit together. Carmen was a small, sturdy woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd been invited into something precious. She hugged me like I was her own mother, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the warmth of being genuinely welcomed into a family circle. "Mrs. Eleanor," Carmen said, pulling her chair close to my bed and taking my hands in hers. "Gabriel and I have been talking. We have a proposition for you." They'd been house hunting, they explained, looking for a place with enough space for Gabriel's elderly uncle who could no longer live alone. But now they had a different vision. They wanted to buy a house with a small guest house in the back, a place where I could live with privacy and dignity, but never alone. "We want to be your family," Gabriel said simply. "Not because we feel sorry for you, but because we love you, because you've become essential to our happiness." The tears came then, flowing freely down my cheeks. For almost a year I'd felt like damaged goods, like someone who'd outlived her usefulness. Now I was being offered not just a home, but a place where I belonged, where I was wanted, where I mattered. We spent the entire afternoon planning our shared future. They'd found a perfect house on the outskirts of town, with a small but complete cottage that would be all mine. I would contribute to the down payment, not as charity, but as an investment in our life together. We would have Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday parties for Miguel when he was strong enough to visit. I would teach Carmen my mother's recipe for apple pie, and she would teach me to make her famous tres leches cake. That night I slept more peacefully than I had in months. I dreamed of Carmen's kitchen, of helping her knead dough for fresh bread. I dreamed of watching Miguel grow healthy and strong, of being there when he graduated from medical school, maybe even when he got married and had children of his own. I dreamed of having a purpose again, of being needed, of waking up each morning with a reason to get dressed and face the world. The call came at 4:30 in the morning. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing, my heart immediately racing with the terror that comes with late-night calls when you're my age. It was Dr. Peterson, the facility's physician, her voice professional but tinged with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, your blood pressure spiked during the night, and we're seeing some irregularities in your heart rhythm. I think it's best if you stay in bed today and let us monitor you closely." I'd been feeling more tired than usual lately, more breathless when I walked to the dining room, but I'd attributed it to the excitement of planning my new life with Gabrielle and Carmen, to the joy of having something to look forward to for the first time in months. Now, as I lay in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to my own heartbeat, I wondered if my body was trying to tell me something my mind refused to accept. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just as I'd found people who wanted to build a life with me, my body was preparing to let go of life altogether, but I wasn't bitter about it. If anything, I felt grateful that I'd been given this glimpse of what love could look like when it was freely chosen, rather than obligated. I'd learned that family wasn't always about blood, that home wasn't always about the house where you'd raised your children, that love could bloom even in the sterile soil of a nursing home. Later that morning, I called Gabriel. "Mijo," I said, my voice weaker than I'd intended. "I need you to know something. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that these past months, with you and Carmen, have been the happiest of my entire life. You've given me back my worth, my dignity, my joy." He tried to interrupt, to tell me I was being unnecessarily dramatic, but I pressed on. "There's something else," I continued, reaching for the leather journal I'd been writing in. "I've been keeping a record of everything. Our conversations, your kindness, the way you've made me feel human again. If I'm not here when you come to take me home, I want you to share our story, not for fame or attention, but so other people know that love like this exists, that families can be made from choice as much as from chance." I passed away quietly in my sleep 2 days later, just hours before Gabriel and Carmen were scheduled to visit and finalize our moving plans. What follows now comes from the pages of the journal Eleanor left behind, her final words, her memories, and the truth she wanted the world to hear. The night nurse found me in the morning, peaceful and still, my journal clutched against my chest. She said it looked like I'd simply closed my eyes and decided it was time to rest, that there was even a slight smile on my face. Gabriel arrived that afternoon carrying a small suitcase and the keys to our new house. The devastation on his face when the staff told him what had happened was heartbreaking to witness. He sat beside my empty bed for hours, reading the journal I'd left for him, learning about how much our friendship had meant to me, how he'd saved me from despair when I'd thought there was no hope left. In my final entries, I'd explained everything, how he'd given me a reason to believe in love again, how he'd shown me that worth wasn't determined by usefulness, how he'd taught me that the most beautiful relationships are the ones where people choose each other freely. I'd also included detailed instructions about my remaining assets, about the house I'd secretly bought back from my children through a lawyer, about my final wish for how my story should be shared. "She wanted you to have this," the nurse said, handing him my mother's cameo brooch. Inside the jewelry box, she'd left a final letter explaining that the house on Maple Street, the one where I'd raised my children, where I'd loved Harold, where I'd been truly happy, was now legally his. I'd used the last of my bonds to buy it back, wanting him to have the place where I'd experienced real joy, where love had flourished, where memories lived in every room. The house was now Gabriel's, along with everything in it that my children had left behind. It was my final gift to the man who'd given me back my heart when I thought it was too late to feel love again. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel struggled with grief and gratitude in equal measure. He'd gained a house, a legacy, a tangible reminder of our friendship, but he'd lost the woman who'd become his chosen mother, the grandmother his children would never have the chance to know. Unable to keep our story to himself, Gabriel wrote to the Cedar Falls Tribune, sharing the tale of an elderly woman who'd been abandoned by her own children, but had found family in the kindness of strangers. He used fictional names to protect everyone's privacy, but the emotions were real. The love was real. The lesson was universal. The editor, moved by the story, featured it on the front page of the Sunday edition. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from the traffic as people shared the story across social media platforms. Within days, news outlets from Des Moines to Chicago were reporting on the grandmother who'd left her inheritance to a man who had shown her love in her final days. The comment sections filled with similar stories. Elderly people forgotten by their families, young people who'd found purpose in caring for seniors, families reconciled by the reminder of what really mattered. My children saw the story, of course. They recognized the details despite the changed names, realized it was about me, about them, about the choices they'd made, and the consequences they'd have to live with. Rebecca called Sunset Manor in tears, demanding to know if it was true, if I'd really given away their inheritance to a stranger. Thomas hired a lawyer to investigate, to see if there was any way to contest what I'd done. But the legal documents were ironclad. I'd been declared mentally competent by 3 different physicians, had worked with a reputable attorney, had documented my wishes clearly and repeatedly. The house, the remaining savings, the jewelry, all of it belonged to Gabriel now, given freely by someone who'd found more love in 8 months of chosen family than in 87 years of obligated blood relations. The story continued to spread, translated into multiple languages, shared millions of times across the globe. It became a symbol of the growing crisis of elder abandonment, a reminder that love is a choice we make every day, not just a feeling we inherit. Parents showed it to their children, couples discussed it over dinner, and slowly, conversations began to change about what we owe to those who raised us and what we can offer to those who need us most. If this story touches your heart the way it touched mine, stay with me. There are so many more stories like this that need to be told. I can't help but wonder, have you ever experienced love that chose you when it didn't have to? Have you ever found family in the most unexpected places? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Looking back now, I realize that my story isn't really about money or houses, or even about being forgotten. It's about the moment when you stop waiting for love to find you and start recognizing it when it appears wearing ordinary clothes and speaking with an accent different from your own. Gabriel didn't love me because he had to. He loved me because he chose to. And in that choice, I found something I'd been searching for my entire life, the knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. My children gave me life, but Gabriel gave me back my will to live. They saw me as a problem to be solved, but he saw me as a person worth knowing. In my final months, I learned that family isn't always the people who share your DNA. Sometimes it's the people who share your heart, your values, your commitment to choosing love over convenience. And if my story teaches anything, I hope it's this. Love is always a choice, and the most beautiful love of all is the kind that chooses you when it doesn't have to. The house where I raised my children now shelters the family I chose when I needed them most. The silver dollars I saved for a rainy day brought sunshine to a family facing their darkest storm. And somewhere in that small cottage I'll never get to call home, Carmen tends a garden with roses I'll never see bloom. But I'm not sad about that. I'm grateful, because I learned, in the end, that love multiplies when you give it away, and that the most precious inheritance you can leave isn't money or property, but the knowledge that kindness matters, that people can choose to care for each other, and that it's never too late to find your true family. If this story speaks to your heart the way it spoke to mine, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Have you ever experienced the kind of love that chooses you freely? Your story matters, and I'd be honored to hear it. And if you'd like to continue this journey with me, hearing more stories about the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected ways we find love and meaning in our lives, please subscribe. It would be my privilege to share more of these conversations with you, because stories like Eleanor's remind us that every ending can be a beginning, and every choice to love makes the world a little brighter.